I've done it. I've completed Season 2 of Diablo 4. I've reached level 100 completely solo, defeated every boss, finished the battle pass, earned every challenge, and I'm here to tell you all about my experience. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's jump right in. Season of Blood is a season that has stirred up a lot of interest in the past few weeks. Not only have the Diablo team at Blizzard added some much needed quality of life changes with this release, but it also brought with it some necessary endgame content in the form of new bosses. The lack of endgame content was something the community had been complaining about for months now, as there was nothing to do after level 75 other than clearing nightmare dungeons, grinding the Helltide events, and defeat Uber Lilith. This lack of content led to a lot of internet backlash, and most of the players dropping off before reaching max level, myself included, as I stopped playing Season 1, Season of the Malignant, at level 73. Simply because I was bored of running endless nightmare dungeons again and again and again. In this video, I want to run you through everything Season of Blood brought to Diablo 4, as well as the new endgame content and my thoughts on them. Let's start with Vampiric Powers. Vampiric Powers allow you to cosplay as your favorite vampire as you run through Sanctuary killing everything in sight. These powers range from turning into a swarm of vampires when you evade, to absorbing the souls of your enemies and unleashing them every time you use a specific type of ability. The powers feel especially fun from level 1 to 50. As you start taking part in the seasonal content, you'll start picking up potent blood from killing vampires, which you can then spend to unlock Vampiric Powers. Every time I unlocked a new power, I would equip it to test it out, and it made the combat exciting and fresh. During my playthrough, I played around with each power and found them to add a new layer to the combat. The powers are so different from one to the next that depending on which power you equip, your gameplay can completely change, which I love to see. One of my pet peeves with ARPGs is when a mechanic only changes your gameplay in very incremental and minuscule ways. Improving your attack speed by 1% just isn't very exciting, is it? Vampiric Powers aren't guilty of that, and that's definitely a pro for me. Where the Vampiric Powers fall down a bit are when it comes to managing the packs on your gear. It's key to make sure you have the correct packs in order to activate the Vampiric Powers you've got equipped, but when you get to endgame, you have so many resources that allow you to edit and change the packs on your gear that any changes you need to make is just tedious. You change your powers, then you reset the packs and reapply the packs you need. The solution to this is not to give us less resources, of course, but it left me wondering why we have the pack system in the first place. The itemization of the game is bad enough that having to spend more time in menus sorting out packs every time you change a piece of gear is just time consuming. It might take only a few minutes, maybe even seconds, sure, but you're just adding another mechanic that takes time away from me destroying vampires. Maybe when you level up a power to level 3, that power no longer requires packs as you've completely mastered it. Maybe that could help. I think this wouldn't be such an issue if itemization wasn't all messed up already and I spent minutes on minutes on minutes trying to figure out what gear I should pick, which we'll get to later. That being said, the Vampiric Powers themselves are a great themed addition to the game that I really enjoyed, and I'll be sad to see them go in Season 3. Now let's talk about something a bit more divisive, the Battle Pass. This is going to be a bit of a controversial take, but I like Battle Passes when done right. They give me an incentive to play the game while rewarding me with cool cosmetics that reflect the theme of the season. It's also priced reasonably at around $10. If anything, it's the only reasonably priced microtransaction in this game. You get 90 levels to unlock, and every level grants you some form of vampire-themed reward. And all in all, it works really well. What I like about the Battle Pass is that you don't need to complete specific objectives to unlock levels. You just need to play the game. Every quest, every kill, every event adds to your progression on the Battle Pass. This felt good and led me to being pleasantly surprised whenever I checked on my progress, only to find that I had unlocked 5+ levels in one playthrough. This was the second Battle Pass I completed on Diablo 4, and it's also to its credit that you'll probably unlock the final level around level 70 or so, which is very achievable while playing a couple of hours a day like I did. My con for the Battle Pass, and this is a big one for me, is the accelerated Battle Pass. This is a version of the Battle Pass that you can purchase for double the price of the standard Battle Pass, and it allows you to skip 20 Battle Pass levels while also giving you a bespoke emote. Now, I don't mind that Blizzard want to put a price on skipping Battle Pass levels, although I don't see why people would want to, but I do mind that they lock an emote behind a more expensive version of the Battle Pass. It's upsetting. Exclusive content that's part of the Battle Pass that I can't unlock without giving more money doesn't seem right to me. Although I've completed the Battle Pass, I feel like I haven't. I feel like I'm missing out on this one emote. It's practically a third tier to the Battle Pass that has nothing to do with playing the game. I'll add to this that I don't think the free levels in the Battle Pass are particularly interesting, so keep that in mind if you want to play the season as a free player. When it comes to open world activities, for a long time, we've only been able to play around with Helltides. These are filled with tough enemies and plenty of resources to collect, including high-level gear. Helltides are in a good space right now, but they weren't for a very long time. The enemy density was too low. Thanks to a bunch of updates though, Helltides are in a much more engaging place now, and have been, overall, fun to play in this season. Now let's talk about the new world event that dropped in Season of Blood, the Blood Harvest. Similarly to Helltides, Blood Harvests are a zone takeover, where an entire region of the map is plunged into darkness and all types of vampires take over. The great thing about the Blood Harvest compared to Helltides is that they are always active. Every hour or so, the Blood Harvest changes regions, but it's always active. This means that whenever you log in, they are available, which is fantastic, as I often only have time to play a couple of hours a day and never really at the same time, and I get really bummed out if I miss the Helltides. So knowing I'll never miss the opportunity to farm some Blood Harvests feels good. Blood Harvests are my favorite addition in Diablo 4 with Season of Blood. Not only is the enemy density in these zones turned up to 11, but you also have many objectives to complete in these regions, from vampire-themed events to burning effigies and everything in between. As you destroy vampires by the dozen, you'll collect blood lures that allow you to unlock an event in the center of the zone. The great thing about this is that you need to activate 3 pillars of blood to launch this event, and each requires 50 blood lures, which in my experience was easy to get, but it was rare for me to have more than 100 at a time. This leads to groups of people recreating that Spider-Man meme as they wait for someone to spend their resources on a pillar before everyone else. You just don't want to activate a pillar and nobody activates the other ones and you're stuck with an event that doesn't start and 50 less of the resource you grinded for. It makes the game feel slightly more social for some reason. And did I mention that you keep the blood lures even when you aren't in the zone? It takes the pressure off having to spend your resources right there and then like the Helltides do. Now, Blizzard could have left it there and I would have been happy, but they added another layer of unlockables, giving me another reason to spend time in Blood Harvests. It's called the Hunter's Acclaim board. This is a feature that is much needed in regards to the Helltide events, and I hope they add it once Season of Blood is over. Every time you kill an important vampire, save humans, or participate in events in the Blood Harvest zone, your reputation grows. The Hunter's Acclaim board keeps track of this reputation and it rewards you with epic caches for each tiers. It's not a genre-breaking experience, but it's definitely a nice addition. So I've already covered the lore of Season of Blood in another video, but I wanted to quickly touch upon it again here. In a nutshell, the story is incredibly weak. There are no twists and turns. It feels like an absolute afterthought. It starts off quite well. While trying to save some merchants, you get infected with the vampire curse, but the curse doesn't transform you into a vampire like all the other people that have contracted it. No, you have special blood thanks to eating some of Lilith's blood petals in the main campaign. Having alterated blood means you get to use the powers of the vampires without turning into one. You then follow a vampire hunter named Eris through Sanctuary as you try to fight back the vampiric corruption that an ancient vampire lord named Zir is unleashing on the world. Now, not once do we get to know more about Zir's origins or the origins of Eris. And speaking of Eris, she spends the entire questline being afraid of you turning into a vampire, when we all know that's not going to happen. So there are absolutely no stakes during the quests. It's just pointless dialogue of her expressing her concern that you will turn into a vampire. The questline then culminates in a quite impressive boss fight against Lord Zir, which was actually the coolest part of the entire story. And that's about everything I want to say about the questline. It's just not good enough for me to give a crap, which makes me sad, as the story and the lore is probably what I look forward to the most in Diablo 4. Now, I know there's not a lot of us, but I think it's important. If you want to hear what I would have done differently, you can listen to my full breakdown of the lore in this other video. One of the biggest changes that the Season of Blood patch brought to Diablo 4 Endgame is a bunch of new and returning bosses to vanquish when you get to level 75 and above. Up until now, our only options at endgame were to fight Varshan and Uber Lilith. Having these bosses available to us now is such a good improvement to the game, as it adds another layer to the gameplay rotation of endgame. If I got bored of world events or nightmare dungeons, I would usually try and seek out a boss to defeat. And the best part is, you can target farm uniques with these bosses. Each boss can drop specific uniques, which means if you are looking to follow a build that requires a unique, you can look up which boss drops that piece of gear. Which is fantastic, as it gave me something to work towards when trying to complete my build. It actually reminded of my early days in World of Warcraft, when you would be so excited for the weekend raid because you knew that a certain boss might drop a specific weapon that might be great for your build, right? The one boss I ended up needing help with though is Uber Lilith. Although I was level 100, had full 925 item level gear, and a pretty solid Paragon board setup, my skills were just not good enough to beat her one-shot mechanics. And trust me, I tried for hours. Watched video guides, build guides. Props to anyone who managed to kill her solo. I guess my con for bosses then is just these one-shot mechanics. Maybe some people like them, but I'm not one of them. That doesn't mean they should be changed though. It's just my take. I now want to talk about probably my biggest gripe with Diablo 4 Season of Blood, and Diablo 4 as a whole, I think. The itemization. And what I mean by this is everything that has to do with gear and inventory management. You see, when I started this season, the first 60 levels or so were really fun. I would rotate between the Blood Harvest events, the world bosses, the Hell Tides, and the dungeons, and every item that dropped felt like a powerful upgrade. Sure, I had to go through them and pick the ones that fit my build the best, but it wasn't too overwhelming as I wouldn't have that many items to go through. This all changed when I got to tier 4 and started dropping items around the 750 plus item level. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with items of all rarities and types, but figuring out which ones were better than what I already had equipped was an absolute nightmare. The conundrum here is that I absolutely love when the game leans into the explosion of items on screen, something that often happens during a Blood Harvest events, by the way. It feels like an absolute improvement when that happens. But then when it comes to managing those items and sorting through them, the game just grinds to a complete halt. To put it simply, I would do an event or a dungeon. I would be having a great time flying through enemies, and midway through, my inventory would be full. So I teleport back to the city, and now I have to figure out what I want to keep, what I want to extract the aspects from, and what I want to dismantle. This could take minutes, when it should really only take seconds. But most of the time, I wasn't sure if I should keep an item or not. So I would have to look up builds online and figure out if a specific affix was the right one for my build, and I would be stuck for ages in town. See how the fun stopped? You've got one part of this game which is fast-paced murder fest of a good time, and the other part which is tedious and quite frustrating. Going from an exhilarating blood harvest to an inventory management sim is grueling and sucks out all the fun of the game. I don't think Blizzard can get over this one without a full rework of the items in Diablo 4. At the very least, I think we could use a loot filter system, which allows you to specify what affixes or aspects you are looking for, and that filters the loot that drops based on those filters. This would make looting way easier, as it would help me pick up exactly what I want, rather than picking up everything and going through it with a fine comb. Speaking of aspects, I've extracted too many. Instead of having these aspects clogging up the inventory and stash, which God knows are full of items, I think a better way to deal with them is to treat them as upgrades to the aspect you've already unlocked at the occultist. Simply put, if you extract an aspect you already own, it upgrades that aspect by, let's say, 1 to 10%, something along those lines. Diablo 4 Season of Blood is the best version of Diablo 4 we've had since the launch back in June 2023. On my journey to level 100, I had a blast going through each activity, completing the battle pass and playing around with the new Vampiric Powers. If you are a fan of Diablo games, this is a good time to jump in, although I believe there are still quite a few improvements needed to make this a game you play for weeks and months at a time without getting bored. Grinding levels after level 85 felt like an unsatisfying slog to me, and it's clear that there is a gap there that could be filled with something new. The new bosses are great endgame content, but they don't help you level up. My biggest issue with the game after the itemization is the lack of tools to help me take chances and experiment with my build. A loadout feature, for example, would be very welcome. I also want to add to my final thoughts that leveling up glyphs was straight up torture. When it comes down to it, in my opinion, Diablo 4 shines the most from level 1 to 75. I was straight up hooked to the game between those levels, thinking about it at work, in my sleep, at the grocery store. It's everything I wanted to do. But once I got to those later levels and started getting bogged down in item management, the gameplay loop lost its appeal to me. And if like me, you are more of a casual gamer, I would not recommend pushing further than level 75, as the content just gets grindy and tedious after that, in my opinion. When I dinged level 100, all I could think about was that the journey to max level was more trouble than it was worth. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm looking forward to Season 3 and seeing what new quality of life improvements it brings. Until then, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Let's have a conversation in the comments. I want to know what you think of this season. Let me know your thoughts. Let's try to keep it positive and constructive. If you think there's something lacking in the game, why don't you give us a solution? I'd love to hear from you. Again, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and we'll see you in the next one.